Hi, Brian Butler. Thanks a lot for coming on the show. I really appreciate you giving us some of your time. Could you give us a kind of brief biography of yourself, please?
I'm a filmmaker, writer, and musician. I worked with Disinformation quite a bit. I published an essay in their Book of Lies about Marjorie Cameron, and I produced several segments for their documentary TV series, one on Satanism. And in music, I played and recorded with Roz Williams of Christian Death. I played with Von Elmo in New York and various other projects, solo stuff. And I have a sound multimedia project with Kenneth Anger called Technicolor Skull.
Okay, cool. Well, we've brought you on to talk to you about a variety of things today, but one of the main things we want to talk to you about is a well-known character in the occult world called Jack Parsons. Could you give us a little bit of background on Jack Parsons? You know, how did he grow up? What was the kind of social climate of his time?
Well, he was, he grew up in, the 30s and 40s, and I guess it was much more conservative then. He was living in Pasadena, and I guess at that time the ideas of Thelema and Aleister Crowley were a lot more controversial than they are now.
So it was much more of a kind of controversial thing to kind of get into, wasn't it? I think
Yeah,
at the time.
a bit more obscure.
So, I mean, one of the famous stories is that he apparently evoked Satan at age 13.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of a common thing for someone that gets into magic. I think it was the same for Aleister Crowley. That's sort of the first
Yeah,
step.
yeah. I was about to say that.
Gotta get that out of the way.
Yeah, I think he tried to. He sort of called himself a Satanist for a while, didn't he, Crowley? And yeah, when he was like quite young, at the same sort of age, I think actually. So.
Yeah, I think that's a way of sort of simplifying the occult for people, most people can understand or respond to as Satan.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of a.
And Western magic or, Kabbalah, people usually, especially then, had no idea what that meant.
I'll get back into it a bit more later on, but do you think that maybe part of the reason for that is kind of some of the films of the time and the way that the occult was kind of portrayed in the media in that time?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say, and that's what happened with Aleister Crowley, is that's how he really, got famous, was through the British tabloids that really had a distorted view of what he was doing and sensationalized it in a satanic way.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mean, we won't talk too much about this because we kind of want to get into the magical nitty gritty, as it were. But Jack Parsons is also well known for his scientific work, and I guess most famously for his rocket science. Could you maybe talk a little bit? I think there's a kind of connection, isn't there, between his kind of scientific work and his occult work? How did the two kind of cross over for him, if that makes sense?
I would say, yeah, because I think a lot of his scientific work was creative and very intuitive. The way that he made some of his discoveries and the way that he worked was very intuitive, and which is, it's how that magic works as well, kind of by doing, rather than analyzing too much.
What kind of age did he and how did he discover Crowley's Thelema?
He discovered it through science fiction, through his science fiction book club. He was it was like Forrest Ackerman arranged meetings with different sci-fi authors. I think that's when Hubbard was, kind of involved. So there was a body of literature that they were, interested in, and Crowley was sort of an influence on that work.
Yeah, I mean, you often hear about kind of mystical practices and occult practices having an effect on, I guess, science fiction, and I mean, Philip K. Dick would be another good example of that, and that kind of crossover where people are trying to draw imagination, I guess, for stories. I guess that's definitely one of the things. Okay, so could you talk a little bit about do you know who Wilfred T. Smith is and the kind of relationship he had with Jack Parsons?
Well, Smith was the leader of the OTO Lodge at the time that Parsons became interested. And I guess in the beginning, he was sort of a teacher Jack Parsons in magic, and it was his through Smith that Parsons came into contact with Aleister Crowley.
Hmm. And then, how would you say Parsons' relationship with Crowley evolved, as it were? Because I know it became a bit more turbulent, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Crowley definitely saw the potential in Jack Parsons, but he also saw a weakness in that Parsons was being taken advantage of by Smith to a certain degree, and definitely by L. Ron Hubbard.
Hmm.
And later on, even not taken advantage of, but overpowered maybe by Cameron, you know? So, and he was very, like I said, he was very intuitive and maybe adventurous, and he would, sort of jump into certain practices with maybe without enough preparation, you know?
I think that was common if we look at the people that Crowley worked with over the course of his career when he would take on sort of a younger protege. Um, they weren't always these occult experts. They were often just very sort of starry-eyed. Do you think Parsons was sort of the same way? He, he is sort of manipulated by a lot of different people during this period, during this initial period, anyway.
Yeah, and the system is so complex too. It's very difficult to even get a grasp on it in a short period of time, you know. So he was very much, open to the ideas of those around him, such as Smith and Crowley.
The lodge he became a member of, I think it's called, is it Agape Lodge or Aguape? I can't pronounce that word.
Yeah, Agape Lodge in
Agape.
Pasadena.
Yeah, so I mean, could you tell us a bit about kind of like how he kind of progressed? I should say. I mean, he was quite a dutiful candidate, wasn't he, in terms of his progression through the order, and it ended up with him. I think eventually leading the lodge at one point.
Yeah, yeah, it was very rapid, and I think he kind of outran a lot of the people that were involved in the Pasadena Lodge, and I guess sort of left the OTO more for an AA path or witchcraft,
Yeah.
which he was into later on.
I mean, we'll talk about the witchcraft a little bit later on because that kind of really takes a hold later in Parsons's kind of magical career, I suppose. But could you talk about kind of some of the other members that were involved in the Agape Lodge at this time? Because I think there were some quite prominent characters of their time involved.
Yeah, I mean, one was Lewis Culling, who was, sort of the protege of C.F. Russell, who had a very interesting system of magic. There was Jane Wolfe, who spent time at the Abbey of Thelema, and was, initiated by Crowley. Grady McMurtry, who, later led a different OTO in California. And, there was quite a few characters around at that time.
So you say that, Parsons ended up leading the Agape Lodge, and was this how do you reckon this was received? Because I think he actually overtook, like you said, some of the people that were higher ranked than him in the first place, didn't he? Kind of sort of ended up kind of flying through the ranks, as it were, and I think that kind of caused some sort of a bit of dissension, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in any kind of group, you have that where everyone sort of tends to a certain level, and if someone breaks away from that and progresses at their own rate, then it causes problems. Before that was with Aleister Crowley and the Golden Dawn.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the AA was probably a better system for Jack Parsons,
Yeah. Do you think that maybe in some ways, especially earlier on, Crowley saw a bit of himself in Jack Parsons almost, in the kind of way, in their kind of stories are quite similar, aren't they, in some ways?
Yeah, I'd say definitely they were both very adventurous and bordering on reckless,
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing that Parsons is often kind of, I guess, tarred with is he has a kind of obsession with sex magic that keeps rearing its head throughout his kind of writings and his career.
Definitely, I would say that was the basis of all his important work was, around Babylon and the workings with the Enochian tablets and sex magic, the ninth degree. I mean, there's that famous letter, ninth degree emblems and modes of use, which was written to Parsons by Crowley, which basically spells out the ninth degree working.
Yeah. And yeah, I think we spoke about that a little bit. We interviewed Donald Michael Craig recently, who wrote Modern Magic and modern sex magic, and I think he speaks quite a lot about that in one of the episodes we did with him. So if people want to hear about that, they can check that episode. But okay, so I mean, earlier on we were talking about the science fiction group that Parsons was a member of. And you brought up quite a famous name that he was involved with, and I'm quite interested to talk to you about this because it's one of these areas that kind of lends itself to myth quite a lot, and that's the relationship between Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. Obviously, Hubbard being the founder of Scientology, and it's kind of a controversial character in his own way. Could you tell me about like kind of the relationship between the two? Like, how did they meet? Obviously, I assume they met at this book club. And kind of how their relationship progressed.
Well, I guess first of all, we have two kind of records of that. We have Parsons' version and we have Hubbard's version, which are very different. So I'll go with Parsons' version. I think that Parsons was kind of fascinated with Hubbard and admired, his work in science fiction. And I think it was a bit mutual. And with Hubbard having an interest in Aleister Crowley. And it was an interesting relationship, I think Hubbard had the stronger personality of the two. And he kind of dominated their workings to a certain extent. But, maybe Parsons needed that, somehow it worked, I think, between the two.
Did Hubbard actually join the OTO, or was he a kind of side project, as it were?
As far as I know, he never joined or took any of the oaths of the OTO, but he, through working with Parsons, got a knowledge or understanding of a lot of the OTO workings, especially the ninth degree working.
He often he claimed later. I mean, I don't know if our listeners know this. I can't remember if I've spoken about it before. I did my master's degree thesis looking sociologically at Scientology, so I ended up doing a lot of research into Hubbard, and this is where I one of the times I really first came upon Jack Parsons is when I was studying, looking at Scientology, and obviously Hubbard's version, like you said, is quite different. He claims that he was trying to kind of upset the OTO, didn't he? Like, as some kind of trying to bring down this quote Satanist group kind of thing. I mean, how deep into the kind of the sort of culture of the OTO do you think L. Ron Hubbard actually managed to get, or do you think he was kind of considered as a bit of a joke?
I don't think he was, because the OTO is somewhat a social order, rather than a magical one. And I don't think Hubbard really sought to become a member or join the order. I think that he was very interested in the principles of some of the magical workings, especially, sex magic. I think that he just sort of took what knowledge he could, and some people, say that he incorporated that or used that power to form his own order, which was, in some ways very successful.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people say you can see kind of Thelema in Dianetics. I don't know. Have you ever read Dianetics?
A bit. I find that stuff really hard to get through. I mean, beyond a few pages. But I understand the overall principles, and some of it has a parallel with Thelema.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's strange. I've read some of it. Like you said, I find it quite difficult to read as well. It's you can sort of see sort of parts of Crowley in there almost, but at the same time, it's I don't want to go there. I don't want to get sued.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay, so I guess this is a good time to start talking about the Babylon working, which is a huge part of Parsons' life. Could you tell us what the Babylon working is and what Babylon is in terms of Thelema?
Babylon is sort of the feminine dark force in Thelema. It's in the Kabbalah. It's represented by the Binah, and it if someone takes the oath of the abyss, which Parsons did, that is sort of the force beyond the abyss, is the Babylon, force. And so he sought to bring this force, or to incarnate it through a magical child.
And that's the Moon Child, isn't it? Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
So, I mean, so in terms of the actual working, the idea is that I guess you invoke or evoke some kind of elemental, isn't it? And then actually, yeah, like you said, produce a physical child. And what's the kind of the point of the Moon Child then? I mean, what do they? What's the kind of in philemic terms? What's the I guess the function of a Moon Child?
I guess it's kind of like a homunculus or a golem. It's a being that's an elemental that has a very specific purpose, but it's a human being that has a specific intent. So it's in a human body, but maybe it's not human.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And to act for the invocation, he had to get an elemental mate to do this working to create, the magical child.
Yeah. And I think it was during the Babylon working during the Babylon working he met Marjorie Cameron, or is it?
Well, he did the first working was a collaboration with Hubbard to get an elemental mate to do the Babylon working, and shortly thereafter, Cameron appeared, and he felt that was the elemental that he had sought.
Yeah, the kind of Scarlet Woman, as they call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And was there? This is the part where my kind of knowledge of Hubbard and Parsons' relationship becomes a little bit hazy, because I know at some point around this kind of during this period, Hubbard runs away, doesn't he? With I think all of Parsons' money or something along those lines.
Yeah, I think they formed some kind of entity, company, and Parsons, I guess, left with. Hubbard left with Parsons' woman and his money and his boat.
Okay, and it wasn't actually Marjorie though, was it, that he left with, or was it?
No.
No. Okay, right. That's where I was getting a bit
Right.
confused. But okay, so obviously, could you talk a little bit about Marjorie's kind of relationship with Jack Parsons, because this is another kind of big part of his life, I'd say. But this is obviously something that you've written about as well in the Book of Lies, the Disinfo book. But could you, just talk a little bit about their kind of relationship and kind of what went down basically between the two of them?
Again, I think that she was the stronger, personality of the two. And in the beginning, she wasn't aware that any kind of magic was going on, any kind of sex magic or anything like that. But later on, she became sort of a magical student, and there's correspondence between them where, she's learning about, the different books in the AA system. And she was more, just like, I guess, his Scarlet Woman and his magical counterpart.
One thing that came out of this whole process, obviously the Book of the Law is the kind of holy book of Thelema, isn't the received by Crowley. Parsons claimed to have received a 4th chapter, didn't he, of the Book of the Law? I think it was called the Book of Babylon. Could you tell us a little bit about that chapter and kind of how it was received?
Yeah, that was received in the desert, I believe, and very much in the same way as Crowley received the Book of the Law. But I don't know if it was ever accepted widely. There's not much documented about people studying or analyzing that book. So
it almost seems to me like even if someone did kind of come up with a 4th chapter of the Book of the Law, no one would kind of believe it was the 4th chapter of the Book of the Law, if that makes sense. So it's kind of it's almost as if you could sort of see the same thing happening in Christianity, I suppose, where if someone came down, claimed that they were Jesus or they had a New Testament, as it were, it probably wouldn't be believed. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
Aleister Crowley's Joseph Smith or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that it would have been better to create his own book rather than a book that would have to be accepted as a part of another system or another person's book. I think that it was very difficult to do, and so yeah, I guess basically it didn't work. I mean, if his intent was to have that integrated and to be later published with the Book of the Law, like this is the next chapter, that never happened, or it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, definitely. So some people have argued that at kind of this point in his career, Parsons might have been going a bit bonkers or a bit mad, but you could also argue that it was just that he was trying to push the kind of magical ritual and the magical experience to its kind of natural extreme. What do you think about that kind of assessment?
Well, he took the oath of the abyss, so kind of he had the expected result. The same thing happened with Jones. Maybe not so much with Crowley, but Crowley actually went through the grades of the order. Parsons took the oath of the abyss, without taking the grades that were sort of a preliminary to that. So in some ways, that's kind of evoking madness upon yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, it's almost a lot of. I was talking to someone that is a member of the ATO recently. He's quite a fan of Jack Parsons, and he was saying that he felt that had Parsons survived, he might have actually started up his own order, as it were. Have you ever heard anything about this? I mean, do you think he would have eventually left the ATO and started his own take on Thelema, as it were?
Well, yeah, I know that he had aspirations to start a magical school. I think it was in Israel, actually.
So what actually happened to him? I've heard it was sort of unclear how he died, or
the circumstances of his death. I guess it's a little bit questionable. Was it was he murdered? Was it a suicide? Was it an accident? I mean, I guess there's no way to ever really know. But I guess the accepted version is that it was an accident, that he was working with some hazardous materials and there was an explosion, but he was the only one there, so we'll probably never know.
What do you think of the idea that it was some sort of occult ritual gone wrong? Because we've heard that sort of kicked around a little bit.
Well, I mean, I would say maybe in a greater sense, if you could say that his life was an occult ritual.
Fair enough.
But I don't think that he was actually, using explosives in a magical ritual that, like you did, one day you just said, I'm going to do a ritual and do this. I think, it was maybe even predicted, in his book, that he would have a violent or, fiery death.
You also said potentially it was a suicide, and I've heard that theory as well myself. Why would he want to commit suicide? Do you think maybe he, I don't know, reached some kind of limit, or?
I mean, I don't personally think that it was a suicide, but that's just like an obvious, conclusion that some people would have. If it wasn't an accident, it was a suicide. But I can't see anything in his life or writings that would indicate it was a suicide.
Yeah. Okay, so just before we sort of continue talking about some other subjects, really, why do you think Jack Parsons is one of these sort of characters that's kind of survived the test of time? He's almost like a kind of, I guess, a slightly latter-day Crowley in his infamy, as it were. Why do you think him in particular? He seems to be the kind of, one of the kind of next. When you think about the ATO, you think instantly of Crowley, but the next person you think of normally would be Jack Parsons. Why do you think that is? Why is it that he's kind of so revered in the occult world still?
I would say for several reasons. One would be his credibility. You know, he was respected for his scientific work, which you know, not so many people that are, you know, are associated with Thelema or you know, are famous in that way for something else, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
And another reason is he documented a lot of the things that he did were well documented, and he wrote, you know, and he came up with this book of Babylon and the book of the Antichrist, where he documented his experiments. So that's kind of, and obviously the way that he died was very, you know, interesting at least. And so those are the things that kind of make up a legend. So
yeah, I'd also add that maybe it's to do with the kind of the way he went about his magic as well. I mean, he was very like Crowley, kind of took it to extremes, and you know, you don't really sort of see a lot of accounts of that kind of magic going on. If that makes sense.
yeah, exactly. You know, with his whole Antichrist thing, he had a, you know, a certain level of charisma and way that he did things.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so obviously there's a kind of, I guess, connection between Parsons and your own film works in some ways. It's maybe a slightly tenuous one, but obviously you work with Kenneth Anger, and I believe Marjorie Cameron was actually in a Kenneth Anger film, wasn't she?
Yes, inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
That's right. Excellent. Okay, cool. So actually, let's just go back a bit. How did you kind of get into film, and how did you end up kind of working with Kenneth Anger?
I first got into film through Disinformation. I was producing documentary segments for their television show, and it was through that that I met Kenneth Anger.
Can you talk a little bit about, you know, I've been working for Disinformation myself, doing podcasts for them. What was it like on the set and filming those original TV documentaries that became the Disinformation series?
It was, you know, it was fun. It was interesting. You know, a lot of the things were shot in the field. Like I found this group of Satanists in Southern California, and we went to different locations, you know, in their temples or whatever, and filmed them doing rituals. And so a lot of it was, you know, there wasn't really as much of a set as just out in the field shooting stuff.
Excellent. Okay, cool. So can you tell us a bit about kind of some of your kind of film projects rather than your documentary projects, if that makes sense? I mean, you've just done a documentary about Lucifer Rising, which I want to talk to you about a bit later, but you've also done some kind of mini feature films as well. Can you tell us a little bit about those and kind of like what kind of inspired you to do that type of filmmaking, I suppose?
Well, I was definitely influenced by Kenneth Anger. I've done a few sort of occult influenced short films. One is Loch Ness Magic, where I went to Boleskine House and the surrounding area in Loch Ness, Scotland, and filmed a ritual there, and you know, the house, and just tried to capture the atmosphere of like driving up to the house and just the impression that I got.
How did you find it there? I mean, did you kind of enjoy your time at Boleskine, or?
Yeah, it's very remote. I mean, the closest city is Inverness, so you can kind of see, like, for Crowley, it would have taken the whole day, you know, just to get to the house, and then from the house, there's like just a small little post office and a store there. And that's kind of it. There's the Foyers Falls, which is, you know, I think Robert Burns also visited there. So it's a very, you know, remote and kind of magically charged area.
I'm not sure. Did you ever see the documentary called The Other Loch Ness Monster that was produced about Crowley and Boleskine?
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, what did you think of the? I don't know. Raymond came and visited us recently, and we sat through that documentary, and it's kind of amusing, almost. There seems to be a kind of I don't know. It's a bit sensationalist at times, I found, but I don't know.
Yeah. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I remember it being sensationalized. And I think they had Jimmy Page's childhood friend. They interviewed him, the guy that was sort of tending the house. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah. And they had this amazing guy at the beginning. He's like kind of Scottish poet, I think, who it's kind of hard to explain.
You're just gonna have to do the impression.
Yeah,
You're just gonna have to do it, man.
he basically God, it's so out of context.
Do it. Come on.
He goes,
I feel he's up there watching us now. I do. Angry that we would dare interfere with his life and his property.
it's just the funniest thing you'll ever see, especially if you're drunk when you watch it. That's just what I say.
It's a lot like the BBC did a radio documentary about Crowley called "The Beast of Boleskine." It was, I think, back in the 1970s, and it's a lot like that. It plays up that whole sensationalist, he was so satanic aspect. Which I guess we were talking earlier about how apostasy is often like this internal motivation for a lot of these people who become figures in the occult world. Would you say that apostasy is something that drove you in your early years?
Yeah, I would say definitely it is. I mean, because just the way that, we live in a culture that's basically Christian.
Yeah.
A lot of the ideals and morals that most people have in the US or the UK, I think, are basically Christian, whether they admit it or not,
Often if they realize it or not as well. I think a lot of people don't realize that they kind of embody these kind of morals and values that are actually Christian morals and values, and I think sometimes people don't actually even realize they're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you said you filmed a ritual up in Boleskine. Can you tell us a little bit about the ritual and kind of how that went down?
It went well. It was just sort of a impromptu ritual on the grounds of Boleskine, and the whole thing was just done. It wasn't planned out that much. It was just kind of brought the cameras and just kind of did it. And then, did the editing when I got back and just created this piece in a spontaneous way. So, it just sort of captured that moment that day, I felt, at Boleskine House.
Excellent. Before we talk about Night of Pan, you said you did another short film as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Well, no, as far as for avant-garde or, short films, it's just two.
Oh, it's just two. Okay, cool. All right, okay. Could you tell us a bit about Night of Pan then? Obviously, it stars Kenneth Anger and yourself and Vincent Gallo. That's quite a lineup you've got there.
Yeah, it's sort of an occult fantasy, and again, this was a little more planned, but it was also very spontaneous, and I kind of just brought in my friends. I've been friends with Vincent for quite a long time, and Kenneth, and it just kind of worked out that they were both available to do it. And, we just kind of figured it out like the day of the shoot, their characters and, their performance.
One thing I know, there's a short version of a kind of like micro version of the film up on YouTube, which I think was it for a Japanese festival or something? Or...
It was for a festival in Beijing.
Oh, Beijing.
Yeah, it was called One Dream Rush, and they selected 42 directors, and each one made a 42-second film. So that was my contribution, my 42-second film.
Yeah, one thing I noticed in that was that actually a friend noticed it and pointed it out to me was Kenneth Anger seems to be made up to look a bit like Crowley in the portrait of Crowley. Was that intentional or?
Yes, exactly. That was the inspiration for his character.
Excellent, cool. So can you tell us a bit about the Night of Pan ritual and like kind of the crossover between the ritual of night, because it's something to do with ego death, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. With the idea of crossing the abyss and facing the mad god, or reason or logic, or this sort of barrier between the rational mind and the spiritual world.
How did you kind of try and represent that in the film? Like you said, it was quite spontaneous, but it must have been some kind of structure. Or is there kind of like an integration of the actual Night of Pan ritual into the film?
In a way, in a sort of abstract way. Vincent represents the mad god or Pan, the sort of entity that you encounter. And so, it's very avant-garde or abstract the way it's done, and it also it's on a very deep level, you know, like it communicates on a lot of different levels.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, I'm quite looking forward to seeing it. You say that Kenneth Anger was a big influence, and I'd say certainly visually, there seems to be an influence there with with films like Lucifer Rising and Invocation of My Demon Brother. The kind of very the kind of colours you use, and that Kenneth Anger uses as well. What inspired? The only way I can really describe it to listeners that haven't seen it is with kind of like the 70s record covers. Does that make sense? Kind of that very kind of bright use of colours and very kind of ethereal, evocative colours. Is that something that you sort of were influenced directly from Kenneth Anger, or is that something that kind of imagery you've always wanted to do yourself?
Well, yeah, I'm definitely into that type of music and that whole aesthetic of the 70s. So I would say it's a little of both, you know.
You're credited as being a producer on some of Kenneth Anger's films. Could you tell us about like kind of how that came about and kind of about the films you were a producer on?
Yeah, I just basically enable Kenneth to create, you know, like so he can have his creative process, and I take care of you know, a lot of the logistics and planning, and you know, and whatever is needed. Like sometimes I'll operate the camera or do the editing or, you know, arrange the travel, you know, all the things that come under the umbrella of producing. I worked on Ishville and Brush of Baphomet.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen that yet. Could you tell us a little bit about those two films? These are kind of I've only really seen up to, I can't remember, the ones that kind of like released on DVD, as it were. I don't think these newer ones have been released yet, at least not over here anyway. But do you know if there's plans to release any of the new Kenneth Anger films, the newer Kenneth Anger films, I should say?
Not at the moment, but I'm sure they will eventually be released. But they mainly are traveling, you know, in different festivals and events. Ishville is a film that Kenneth had been working on since the 90s, like even before I met him. And it's a collection or it's created from found footage of the Hitler Youth, and you know, edited and you know, made into a Kenneth Anger film.
Yeah, I mean that's something Kenneth Anger seems to be very interested in, is sort of taking very evocative imagery and often quite controversial imagery. I can't remember which film it is, but the film, which is the film where I think he's actually in it himself and he plays a sailor. I can't remember that one.
Fireworks.
Yeah, I mean that, and at its time that was a hugely controversial thing to do, wasn't it? I mean, this is a time when, you know, for example, like homosexuality was very controversial still, and again, he just tends to be very, I guess his name kind of implies it. You know, he tends to be very interested in pushing boundaries himself, doesn't he? And very kind of evocative films and very evocative kind of themes, I should say, you know, in his films. Would you say that maybe is carried over a bit to your work at all, or are you influenced in that respect as well?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
So you said that the Brush of Baphomet was the other film. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I've seen nothing about that film yet. I mean, that's my own laziness, I think, more than anything. But
Yeah, the Brush of Baphomet was filmed at the Palais de Tokyo in Paris. There was an exhibit there of paintings by Aleister Crowley, which were previously unseen. They were from the period in Cefalù at the Abbey of Thelema. And they were just discovered a few years ago. And a show was organized in Paris, and we went and you know, made a Kenneth Anger film of these paintings.
is it a little bit like the Man They Want to Hang? Is it that kind of?
Yeah, in the sense that it's, you know, it's just paintings. You know, that's the only thing in the film, and with music and a certain style of editing.
We've kind of spoken a lot about magic and kind of your films and the use of magical imagery and stuff. How has magic kind of affected your life? I mean, do you consider yourself a magician or an occultist, or how do you kind of label yourself?
Yeah, I would say definitely I'm an occultist. I've studied, you know, the occult for, you know, a long time. I did take an initiation into, you know, the Golden Dawn and the OTO, you know, initially. and I sort of just explored it on my own for a long time.
And how would you say that kind of explorations, I assume it has influenced your own filmmaking? I mean, would you say that in some ways your own films are magical rituals in their own sense?
Yeah, I would say definitely in that they, they are designed to, alter someone's consciousness and also work on maybe a subconscious or deeper level that might not be immediately apparent upon viewing the film.
One thing that really interests me, and I really want to see it, because well, as far as I know, it hasn't come to the UK yet, which is Technicolor Skull, which is the band you do with Kenneth Anger. Could you tell us a bit about A, like how that ended up occurring, and B, what Technicolor Skull is, and what do you guys actually do?
Technicolor Skull is sort of a multimedia sound and visual performance that Kenneth Anger and I do. I play the Moog synthesizer and guitar, and he plays the theremin. And we have a projection behind us, which is directed by Kenneth Anger. And our first performance was at the Donau Festival in 2008 in Austria. We also on the bill were the Melvins, and also Ishville premiered that same night. So that was an interesting evening, having this film of the Hitler Youth projected on 3 giant screens in sort of a rock concert setting before a performance.
I don't know if you ever you mentioned the Melvins. One of the members of the Melvins is in a band called Phantomus, and they did a kind of live soundtrack with John Zorn to some of Kenneth Anger's films. Did you see that when it happened, or?
Actually, I didn't. That was quite a while ago. That was in New York. I can't remember what year that was, but no, I didn't see that.
Okay. So, do you have any plans to kind of release anything of Technicolor Skull, or is it strictly kind of limited to live performance?
We'll see. We have some things in the works, and we'll just see how it works out, but we don't have any definite release date at this time.
How would you present it? Because I've seen some video clips of it, and it seems to be yourself with samplers or kind of pedals, and Kenneth Anger with a theremin, and then you're playing the kind of a live soundtrack almost, aren't you, to the films behind you? How would you actually, I guess that would be one of the problems, is how would you actually release that as a kind of release?
I mean, it could be with a book of images,
Yeah.
from the performance. And we do have some footage of our performances as well, so it's possible, a DVD. There's a lot of different avenues that we could pursue with that.
That'd definitely be something I'd be interested in checking out. Do you have any plans to bring that over here to the UK at any point, or?
We'll see. Again, we're talking about doing a few things, but nothing's definite, so we'll see.
Okay. Before we let you go, I want to talk a bit about Night of Pan being screened in London, but you've made a documentary called Raising Lucifer, which is a documentary about the film Lucifer Rising. I think it's actually about the production of the film Lucifer Rising, isn't it? Could you tell us a bit about why that film, and I agree it did need one, but why it needed a documentary?
Well, because it has such a long story. It took 13 years to make that film, and it was very dramatic. The events, that surrounded the film, with Bobby Beausoleil in the early days, and then his later involvement with the Manson family and murder conviction. Then you have, Mick Jagger was involved, Jimmy Page, Marianne Faithfull, a lot of people that, were very well known for various things.
Yeah, it's quite an amazing film, really. I saw a lecture. No, it wasn't a lecture. It was on the Disinfo DVD, I think, the Disinfo Con talk with Kenneth Anger. He was talking about how he got access for that film via a member of the ATO who worked in Egypt or something. Is that included in the film? Because that's quite an interesting connection.
Well, this is a short film, and this is just, it's sort of like a small part of a larger project that I'd like to do. So this covers the early period of the film, mainly between Kenneth Anger and Bobby Beausoleil, the sort of dynamic that was going on there.
I know that Kenneth Anger often cites as Jean Cocteau as one of his influences. Would you say that Cocteau's had an influence on your work?
Not so much. I'm not, yeah, I wouldn't say as much. My influences are a bit later than that.
You're finally bringing the Night of Pan to the UK, and when could you tell us a little bit about the event you guys are involved with in this month actually?
Yeah, it's gonna, obviously I'm going to show the film, and I'm gonna do a live performance with a projection, along with Richard Fearless from Death in Vegas, and we're just gonna bring out the Moog synthesizers, and do a live soundtrack to some film footage that I'm putting together for this event.
All right, so it's going to be like kind of exclusive kind of for this event type film.
Yeah, exactly. And then Richard's gonna DJ some sort of dark, music, sort of in that same vein as the films and the live performance.
Yeah, so the venue is the Horse Hospital, the Colonnade, Bloomsbury, London. And if you just Google the Horse Hospital, you'll be able to find it. And it's actually on the front page of the site right now, so it should be pretty easy to track down Brian's event. So is there any future projects you're working on that you can tell us about at the moment before you go? Or?
Well, I'm working on another film. I'm working on a book on the occult. I have several projects in the works, which I don't really want to talk about too much until I get an actual date of release.
Yeah, that's fine. That's cool. Are you allowed to talk about the book at all in any way? That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, I guess I really can't because I don't, nothing's set. So
okay, cool. Don't want to jinx it.
Yeah.
That's fine. Well, thanks a lot for talking to us and giving us some of your time. Really appreciate it. It's been fun actually. So yeah, thanks a lot.